Bill, every day, when we see these silvery white skies toward the horizon in the morning in the east, in the afternoon in the west, skies should be blue, not silvery white. And the bottom line is, even when you don't see the horizon-to-horizon trails, we are absolutely still being sprayed. When you see even the shorter, bright trails, still aerosol disbursement. I challenge anybody, look at the high bypass turbofan jet engine, which is all tankers and all commercial carriers. 80% of the air that passes through that engine is non-combusted. That engine by design is almost incapable of making any type of trail. So when you see the silvery white skies still being sprayed, the horizon-to-horizon trails are the tip of the iceberg for these people.
Stopped doing it, if we ever turned off that stream of sulfate particles into the stratosphere, models suggest we would see a sudden spike in global average temperatures. And that spike would be much more destructive than a gradual increase in temperatures. So all of these sorts of material risks and challenges that scientists have been paying good attention to tie to another set of challenges that we're only just now really starting to grapple with, a set of political risks and challenges. Can you name a human institution that has survived for hundreds or perhaps thousands of years and done the sort of complex things we'd have to imagine human institutions could do to make this a reality? How would we govern, domestically and internationally, putting sulfate particles into the stratosphere or some of these other geoengineering technologies that we're talking about? It's a very difficult thing to imagine, and people are just now starting to grapple with it. Also attached to these political risks are who gets to put their hand on the thermostat? Who decides how these things are used? Because ultimately there are big questions about justice and control baked into this whole conversation. Many of the scientific proponents, the scientists who are pushing for geoengineering research and work, seem to believe that if we opened up space using geoengineering, just to kind of buy us some time, then the international community would get its act together. Suddenly we'd all come together and we'd find a way to transition to a low-carbon economy, which is the only way ultimately to tackle climate change. But that to me just seems like magical thinking. That doesn't make any sense to me. If we can't get our act together in the face of looming crisis, what makes anybody think that we'd suddenly come together once the pressure's off? It might be far more likely that in fact this will be sold as a solution. You can have your high carbon cake and you can eat it too. You can keep living your life just as you're living it because we've made this problem miraculously disappear.
Described before, a nanometer is 1/1000th of a meter. It's very small. In fact, if you have particles, say, that are 40 or 50 nanometers across, you can take and line 50 of them up next to a single red blood cell. These things are extremely tiny. They're pervasive.
The collapse and decrease of agriculture is something I worry about even more than the previous info about autism and Alzheimer's.
Believe me, I'm seriously concerned with what I'm watching. As a wildlife biologist, I've been watching the ecosystem collapse. When you lose all your stream organisms, when you have aluminum overload in your streams, you're killing your microbial bacteria and you're disrupting the entire ecosystem. So it goes way beyond just a little bit of pollution. How did Monsanto know to create aluminum-resistant plants? I don't think I've heard anybody ask that question.
Catastrophe, target California. Now, in the case of California, one, we have a shredded ozone layer, northern and southern hemispheres now. The power structure is trying desperately to hide that from us. We can see our trees around town here. They're burnt to a crisp. So, and we had a recent disclosure I'll talk about in a minute from NASA. But we also have a very straightforward equation. We know from available science that when you aerosolize the atmosphere, it diminishes and disperses rainfall. This is not about cloud seeding to create rain. Again, it's about creating artificial, toxic cloud cover. So we have satellite imagery, which I'll show in a moment, and this is what blocks our storm track. This is what's keeping the rain from falling in California. If you see off the U.S. West Coast, if you look closely near the bottom center, you can see the aircraft trailing. I don't know how visible it is to all of you, but that entire marine layer is aerosols, and all that blows in on us. And what happens when they aerosolize in the atmosphere? Again, it shreds ozone, and it diminishes and disperses rain. It reduces evaporation. This is as far as the rainfall in California, it's a 2 + 2 = 4 equation. Now, I presented this data to Gavin Newsom in the Capitol 2 months ago in his office with his aide. There's no question they got what I passed on to them. but apparently they're too comfortable in their job.
Physics would be like a flashlight shining on a wall. You start with a narrow beam, and by the time you hit the wall, you've got a wide beam. The idea with HAARP is to get it to focus or concentrate that radio frequency energy so it doesn't spread out, so you can hold it tighter together and then manipulate it in very specific ways. Weather control is a broad topic, so there's lots of ways to control and manipulate weather. HAARP is one of them, because you also have private sector companies getting into this business of weather modification. In the case of HAARP, do you need, people always ask me, do you need particulates dispersed in the atmosphere to make it more effective? You actually don't. Would it make things more possible? Could you enhance certain effects? Probably so. Could you control energy distributions more efficiently? Probably so, because you're putting in conductors or you're putting in reflectors, you're putting in particular material.
If you've ever experienced a hailstorm and you've picked up one of the hailstones and you slice it open with a razor blade, you'll see that it's layer upon layer upon layer of ice. Now, hail is usually formed where you have a low pressure system where there's a tremendous updraft of air, where the air gets warmed up by the sunlight ahead of the storm, the air rises, it takes the moisture that's in the air up to a higher altitude.